It's no secret that Palestine's Gaza has been struggling with a major humanitarian crisis as Israel continues blocking aid. Enter Washington's solution, a floating pier off Gaza's coast to shuttle aid into the besieged Palestinian territory, where 1.1 million Palestinians are on the brink of starvation. The project aims to provide around 2 million meals a day, is estimated to cost more than $320 million, and is set to involve around 1,000 US troops, none of whom will be on the ground. How will it work? Through a project called Joint Logistics Over the Shore, or Jlots. The idea is to assemble a floating dock anchored to the seafloor that ships can pick up aid from, as well as a 548-meter-long causeway made of interconnected steel pieces attached to Gaza's shore that juts out into the Mediterranean Sea. The aid will be loaded onto trucks. From there, it will be packed onto transfer vessels, which will then deposit the trucks on a 2-lane causeway from where they have a straight path to Gaza's shores. When the aid finally does reach land, trucks will be subject to Israeli checkpoints. Now, this isn't a novel, revolutionary idea for the Americans. The US military has deployed Jlots for disaster relief missions in Haiti, Somalia, and Central American countries. Apart from the fact that Israel prohibits Gaza from having an international seaport, building an operational port in Gaza is out of the question due to the shallow waters fringing its coast. That's why the US military will assemble the pier and causeway at sea and then drive the causeway into the beach. Okay, so will it work? Well, there are a wide range of issues, like whether the aid will actually make it to the Palestinians in Gaza and how long it will take if it does. Under the US plan, aid will first be delivered to Greek-administered southern Cyprus, where its authorities will inspect it under the watch of Israeli officials. World Central Kitchen tested the path aid deliveries would make on a smaller scale. They found the loading, inspection, and scanning process alone took 2 days for 2 ships. These inspections have been criticized as they lengthen the time it takes for aid to reach its destination.
There is a long list of prohibited items. Anything with metal is not getting in. Different food items are actually on this list.
The aid will then be loaded onto mainly commercial ships to make a 400-kilometer journey, which normally takes about 15 hours, to the floating pier. But if the vessels are bigger and the cargo heavier, the trip can take more time. Human rights activists argue that instead of devising a new aid route, it would be far quicker and cheaper to allow more aid through existing land routes that Israel is currently blocking. That brings us to the next point, and something the White House has itself admitted, that delivering aid through land is a far more effective method. The UN says 500 trucks of aid would be needed to alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The 150 trucks expected to be delivered when the pier is at full capacity would still fall far short of the amount needed to avert a catastrophe.
ينشأ لهدف ما لا نعرفه نحن كمواطن فلسطيني، لكن أعتقد إنه المعابر البرية الموجودة في قطاع غزة تكفي لإدخال المساعدات لقطاع غزة وإطعام الجائعين في شمال قطاع غزة وجنوبه.
في كذا خيار، ليش الآن تم طرح الميناء وليش الآن؟ طيب ليش ما تم سماحنا بعمل الميناء قبل عدة سنوات؟
Others warn that the project could be a smokescreen for Israel's invasion of Rafah, where more than 1 million displaced Palestinians have been seeking refuge. If Israel were to attack the southern city, the Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings would most likely be temporarily closed. That's where the floating pier would come in handy, to substitute aid flows but also to move the Palestinians displaced in Gaza south in order to conduct Israel's offensive on Hamas. Then there are other details yet to be ironed out, like who will ensure security during aid distribution. The success of this plan very much hinges on this. There are worries over whether US troops will come under fire from armed combatants in Gaza. But a more pressing concern is whether aid officials will be safe. A worry that has undoubtedly been exacerbated by the Israeli strikes that killed 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen in early April 2024, and a stampede that turned deadly when Israeli forces fired on Palestinians who had rushed towards a convoy of aid trucks a month earlier.
So then you want to make sure that there's an implementing partner who's able to access all parts of the Gaza Strip, who's not going to be at risk of being bombed. Their convoy will be able to reach the needy people on the Gaza Strip. And I can think of one organization that can easily do that, and that's UNRWA. And they have a funding crisis.
That crisis was caused by Israeli claims that the UN agency had been infiltrated by Hamas, which led the US, the agency's biggest donor, to suspend its funding for the program. Since UNRWA is unable to deliver the aid, USAID has said the UN's World Food Program will help distribute it, first to UN warehouses and then to distribution points. Other reports citing aid officials say that the pier won't be positioned off northern Gaza, where risk of famine is most severe, but at a point controlled by Israeli forces in the so-called Netzarim corridor, which bisects Gaza into north and south. With so many risk factors in Gaza, will the floating pier prove to be a saving grace or a logistical and security nightmare?